Just a couple of hours outside Denver, deep in the Rocky Mountain foothills, sits a prison that's in a league of its own, ADX Florence. It ain't just any prison.
This is the highest security federal lockup in the USA,
where the government sends the worst of the worst. Officially, it's called the U.S. Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, but most people call it ADX or Supermax. Surrounded by razor wire, watchtowers, cameras, dogs, and motion sensors, ADX is damn near impossible to escape. It isn't just solitary, the whole place is the whole. That's why they call it the Alcatraz of the Rockies. And in this video, we're breaking down 6 of the most feared gang members locked up inside ADX Florence right now. Tyler Davis Bingham. To really get Tyler Davis Bingham's story, you have to start with how the Aryan Brotherhood came up in the first place. It all started back in the 1960s at San Quentin out in California, right around the time prisons were getting desegregated. A lot of white inmates weren't feeling that change, so a few of them linked up, and that crew eventually turned into one of the most violent and feared prison gangs in the country. At its core, the AB had 2 main goals. First, dominate the prison system to make time easier for their members. Second, run criminal businesses, from identity theft and fraud to drug trafficking and murder for hire. And when it came to business, they weren't playing. The AB enforced loyalty through blood. Disobeying orders or crossing the wrong member could get somebody killed. By the 1980s, dudes like Barry Mills, Edgar Hevell, and Tommy Silverstein sat at the top, running things as the original leadership council. Then came Tyler Davis Bingham. He wasn't there from the jump, but once he got into the system, he made a name for himself, starting small but moving up quick. By the 90s, even the Italian mafia knew how serious the AB was. When John Gotti, the Teflon Don himself, got locked up in a maximum security federal prison, he linked up with the Aryan Brotherhood for protection. That alliance boosted AB's street credibility and gave them more access to outside operations. Meanwhile, Bingham, nicknamed the Hulk, alongside top AB members like John Greshner and Barry Mills, landed in solitary at the infamous Florence ADX prison in Colorado. The feds thought cutting off communication would slow them down. It didn't. These men found ways to talk, using invisible ink, passing coded messages, and even draining toilets to send signals through the pipes. One message from Bingham reportedly read, "War with DC from TD." Hours later, 2 black inmates were dead and 2 more injured at a Pennsylvania prison. It was clear the AB still had reach, even from the hole. Bingham wasn't just a shot caller, he was one of the gang's commissioners. That meant he helped make top-level decisions like hit orders and alliances. But by 2002, the feds had seen enough. They charged 29 Aryan Brotherhood leaders in a massive RICO case, trying to dismantle the gang's leadership once and for all. Bingham was front and center in that roundup. The charges were serious. He was hit with conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder, and murder itself. Names like Arva Ray, William McKinney, Ismael Benitez Mendez, Salam Joyner, and Byron Ball came up in the case. Some of the charges even focused on plans to target black inmates specifically. Prosecutors went for the death penalty against 21 of the defendants, Bingham included. The trial stretched 5 months, and in 2006, the jury delivered its decision. Bingham was convicted on almost everything except for McKinney's murder. Still, he dodged death row. Instead, he was sentenced to life without parole. Before all this, Bingham actually had a shot at walking free around 2010. But once those new charges and convictions hit, that door slammed shut. Now he's still doing time at Florence ADX. Freddy Geas. Freddy Geas didn't grow up in the mob, but he sure found his way into that world and made himself known. Born into a Greek family in Springfield, Massachusetts, Freddy and his younger brother Ty weren't Italian, so they could never be officially made men in the mafia. That didn't stop them though. From the time they were teenagers, they had their hands deep in the underworld. Springfield locals knew Freddy as a violent dude, one of those people you didn't cross unless you had a death wish, and wherever Freddy was, Ty was never too far behind. It all started spiraling in 1989. Ty, just 17, got locked up for firing a rifle during a fight at a high school hockey game. Freddy, who was 22, threatened to kill the witness who was supposed to testify against his brother. That stunt got him thrown in jail too, and that's where the connections started forming. Ty met a rising mobster named Anthony Arreloda while locked up, and when they got out, Arreloda brought both Freddy and Ty in as his muscle. That move set the stage for the next 2 decades of mayhem. The Geas brothers became the go-to guys for Arreloda. They weren't just out here collecting debts or roughing people up. They were doing hits, robberies, and straight-up gangland violence. By the late 2000s, they had racked up about 75 convictions between them. They never got the official mafia stamp, but everybody in the streets knew they were tight with Arreloda and helped him climb the mob ranks by eliminating anyone in his way. One of their wildest moves came on November 4th, 2003. The Geas brothers murdered Gary Westerman, a former friend turned suspected snitch. They lured him in with a fake plan to rob a weed stash house. Westerman came through ready for action, ski mask and all, but instead of a robbery, Freddy shot him twice in the head. Miraculously, Westerman survived long enough to try to escape, but Freddy, Ty, Arreloda, and Emilio Fusco weren't about to let that slide. They beat him to death with shovels and buried him in a backyard grave they had already dug. His body wasn't found until 2010. A few weeks after that, Freddy got orders to take out Adolfo Big Al Bruno. Bruno was a high-ranking Genovese crime family member and Arreloda's boss. The hit was ordered because Bruno wasn't pulling in enough money, and rumors were flying that he was an informant. The green light came from big boss Arthur Nigro. Freddy didn't pull the trigger himself this time. He paid hitman Frank Roche $10,000 to handle it. Roche walked up to Bruno outside the Our Lady of Mount Carmel club and lit him up. 6 shots to the head and groin. That same year, Freddy also played getaway driver in a failed hit on Bronx Union boss Frank DeBato. Negro ordered that one over an argument about some Tony Bennett concert tickets. 9 shots later, DeBato was still breathing, but it all unraveled fast. Roche and Arreloda flipped and became informants. They brought down Freddy, Ty, and Negro. Arreloda did 99 months and vanished into witness protection. Freddy, on the other hand, stood tall. No tears, no fear. Even with a life sentence staring him down, he never folded. In 2011, Freddy was convicted for the murders of Bruno and Westerman, the attempted murder of D'Abato, and conspiracies to kill 2 more suspected snitches, Luis Santos and Giuseppe Manzi. The beef with Manzi was said to be rivalry related, but Santos, Freddy thought he was snitching. That was enough reason for Freddy. Rats were his #1 enemy, always had been. He ended up with life in prison, plus a $120,000 forfeiture. He was moved to USP Hazleton in West Virginia after getting into it with another inmate. His appeals were denied in 2014. He was stuck there doing his time when James Whitey Bulier showed up in 2018. Now, Whitey Bulier was Boston royalty in the Irish mob back in the 70s and 80s, but he also had that ugly label attached to his name, informant. The feds said he gave up his rivals, though Whitey denied it to his dying breath. In 1994, tipped off that an indictment was coming, he vanished. Spent 16 years on the run before they caught him in California at 81. In 2013, he got convicted of 11 murders and other gangland crimes, some allegedly while he was working with the FBI. Only hours after Bulier arrived at Hazleton on October 30th, 2018, he was murdered, beaten so badly he was almost unrecognizable. Freddy Geas, along with Massachusetts gangster Paul DeCollegiero and Sean McKinnon, were locked up in solitary for over 2 years, while the feds sorted out what happened. Word inside said a lock attached to a belt was used in the killing. One inmate even claimed he watched it go down. Private investigator Ted McDonough summed it up best. Freddy hated rats, and he hated men who hurt women. Whitey was both. That was all Freddy needed. In May 2024, Geas and the other two took plea deals. Freddy pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and assault causing serious injury. He got an extra 25 years, 15 for the manslaughter, 10 for the assault. But that time doesn't even start until after he finishes the life sentence he's already serving. The judge, U.S. District Judge Thomas Klee, said the sentence was fair and just. Prosecutors said Freddy wasn't ever going to see the outside world again anyway. That prison cell, that's his last stop. Freddy's lawyer tried to put up a fight in court, said the autopsy showed Bulier only took one hit to the ear, and there wasn't solid proof a weapon like a lock was even used. But it didn't matter. Both sides had already agreed on the facts. The deal was locked in. Now Freddy Geas is doing time in ADX Florence, locked away in the Colorado Supermax.
James Marcelo.
James J. Marcelo, better known in the streets as Little Jimmy or Jimmy the Man, came up in a life where crime wasn't just an option. It was the family business. Born on December 23, 1943, in Chicago, he grew up with a front row seat to the mob life. Then in 1983, he went through one of the mafia's most sacred rituals. Inside a locked-down restaurant out in western Cook County, he faced the boss himself, Joseph Joey Doves Ayupa. Surrounded by capos and made men, James sat at a table with a gun, a knife, and a candle in front of him. All symbols of what that life really means: death, loyalty, and the life he was choosing. He pricked his finger, burned a saint's card, and swore the oath that locked him into the outfit for life. That was the day Little Jimmy officially became a made man. He didn't waste that rank. He stuck close to Ayupa, acting as his driver and bodyguard, a front row seat to the way a boss moves. Later, he did the same for his capo, Samuel Wings Carlisi. When Carlisi rose to higher ranks, James came right with him. By the early 90s, authorities had pegged him as the underboss of the outfit, right under Carlisi. In December 1992, they both got caught up in a racketeering bust. The charges: loan sharking, bookmaking, and even planning to take out a mob associate named Anthony Dadino. A year later, Marcelo caught a 12.5-year bid. Even behind bars, James wasn't just sitting around. He was still earning, still scheming. Alongside his brother Michael, he ran M&M Amusement, a video poker company. On the surface, it was just fun and games. But if you knew the right people, those machines turned into underground casinos. Authorities later figured the brothers hid over $4 million in income from 1996 to 2003. That was just part of how Marcelo kept stacking bread, even when things got hot. But things got real in 2005, when the feds came through heavy with the family secrets case, one of the biggest takedowns in Chicago mob history. The main witness, Nicholas Calabrese, a mob hitman who flipped.
He pointed fingers, and Marcelo's name came up in connection to some of the outfit's most infamous murders,
including the 1986 killing of the Spilatro brothers, Tony and Michael, the same brothers who inspired the characters in the movie Casino. To make Calabrese's story stick, the feds wired up Marcelo's prison visits. Even though James was slick, covering his mouth, speaking in code, some of those conversations with his brother Michael gave things away. Michael once mentioned a Tribune article about Zhivago and his brother, a coded way of talking about the Spilatro brothers, which the feds immediately picked up on. Marcelo was also sending $4,000 a month to Calabrese's family, an old school move to earn loyalty and maybe keep Nick from saying too much. It worked for a little while. Calabrese held back details, but eventually he broke. Once he did, the feds started collecting DNA from top outfit players, including James.
Thinking it was just a piss test, Marcelo didn't realize it was the beginning of the end.
When Calabrese finally let it all out, the details were brutal. He claimed Marcelo lured the Spilotro brothers with promises. One would get a capo promotion, the other would finally be made. Instead, they got ambushed in a house in Bensonville by 10 mobsters, all wearing gloves. They were beaten and strangled, and Calabrese said Marcelo helped kill both of them. He also tied James to the 1981 murder of Nicholas DeAndrea. Apparently, they were only supposed to rough DeAndrea up for information about a shooting, but things went too far, and the man ended up dead. The family secrets trial kicked off in summer 2007, and it was a circus. Marcelo sat alongside major players like Joseph the Clown Lombardo, Paul the Indian Shiro, and Frank Calabrese Sr., who had both his son and brother testifying against him. Marcelo stayed silent through the whole thing, never taking the stand, never trying to defend himself out loud. He let the courtroom swirl around him. Still, the evidence piled up. Michelle Spilotro, daughter of one of the murdered brothers,
testified that she recognized Marcelo's voice on the phone the day her dad vanished. Calabrese backed it up with his testimony, saying Marcelo drove the brothers to their deaths and helped kill them.
He also repeated his claims about the DeAndrea hit, although the jury wasn't convinced on that one. On September 10th, 2007, the jury found Marcelo guilty on multiple counts: racketeering, illegal gambling, obstructing justice by trying to buy Calabrese's silence, and tax evasion. A few weeks later, they also nailed him for the Spilotro murders, but surprisingly, he beat the DeAndrea charge. By February 2009, it was over. James Marcelo got life without parole and was sent to ADX Florence, a Supermax prison in Colorado, home to some of the most dangerous men in the country.
Pistol Pete.
The streets of Soundview and Castle Hill in the Bronx were wild back in the day, grimy, broke, drug-filled war zones where the odds were stacked against anybody trying to live right. This was the backdrop that raised Peter Rawlick, better known as Pistol Pete. He wasn't just a product of that chaos. He became one of the most feared and respected names to ever come out of it. Growing up, Pete went through the Catholic school system and even attended Adlai E. Stevenson High School. But by 17, he'd already stepped deep into the street life, moving out and living with the man he called his uncle. That same year, in 1993, he brought back an old Bronx gang called Sex, Money, and Murder, originally founded in the late 80s. What Pete did was flip it from a local crew into a full-blown criminal enterprise. And with that, life came bloodshed. In April 1993, he caught his first charge for drug possession. A few months later, at just 18, he caught his first body, shooting and killing Kenyon Jenkins. That move right there stamped his name in the streets for good. Then the crew leveled up. Pete and his people made SMM official. They literally incorporated in Delaware under the name SMMC Inc. They had a real address in New York and opened the business accounts. Payroll was getting processed, taxes were being deducted, and gang members were getting company cars from leasing spots in Pittsburgh. These weren't just rides. They had stash boxes hidden inside for drugs, cash, and heat. Rolick and his crew were moving heavy. On one trip to the Carolinas, they pushed 8 to 10 kilos of coke. They hit Pittsburgh first, dropped 6 keys, collected their money, and kept pushing to North Carolina and South Carolina to do the same. But the drama kicked off in Rockingham, North Carolina, when a dude named Darius Covington, who owed them around $90,000, said he couldn't pay. Pete told his people straight up he was planning to kill him. One of the crew, Gonzalez, talked Pete out of it for the moment. They went to a concert, but the next day, Pete was still on go mode. They went to meet Covington again, but Pete didn't know Covington was a confidential informant who had already tipped off the police. Police showed up to that meet. At first, they found nothing in the van, but after a mechanic got involved, they discovered 2 kilos of coke, $250,000 in cash, and a stash of firearms. Pete and the others were arrested, but released on bond days later. Pete didn't wait around. He bounced back to New York, but trouble followed. Not long after, he was arrested for a murder in Harlem. While being held for the gun charge tied to that case, he got approached by Omar OG Mack Portee and Leonard Dead-Eye McKenzie, founders of the United Blood Nation. They saw Pete as a key piece, violent, respected, and already running his crew. Bringing him in meant expanding UBN's reach. Once Pete was on board, SMM officially became one of UBN's original 8 sets. Pete did 8 months, then his mom bailed him out, but the feds weren't finished. They matched his fingerprints to the North Carolina case and brought him back in. In 1996, he was transferred to Charlotte to face federal drug charges. Even behind bars, authorities believed he was still calling the shots for SMM. By 1999, the feds dropped the hammer. Pete and several SMM members were hit with a 28-count indictment. The government was trying to hit Pete with the death penalty. He was facing RICO charges, 5 murders, 5 attempted murders, murder conspiracies, and drug trafficking. One of the victims, Domingo Osorio, was tied to an attempted hit that Rolack and his crew were charged with. In 2000, Pete pleaded guilty to 6 murders. By November, the court gave him the ultimate punishment, life in solitary plus 105 years, no parole. He had to pay over $25,000 in funeral expenses for his victims. As part of the plea deal, he agreed to limit all contact with the outside world to his lawyer and immediate family, which spared him the needle. He got shipped off to ADX Florence back in December 2000. By 2003, he managed to earn his GED, but he's been locked in the hole ever since. That means 23 hours a day in solitary with just 1 hour out. In 2005, someone recommended he be moved to general population. But yeah, that never happened. Omar Portee, better known in the streets as OG Mack, made his name in a way that left a permanent mark on American gang history. Born and raised in New York, he grew up under the care of his grandmother, and by the time he was 17, he was already catching robbery charges. This wasn't just some troubled kid making bad decisions. He was diving headfirst into that street life. His name first hit major headlines back in 1987 when he witnessed a murder in the Bronx. Terrence Joyner got shot by Don Taylor, and Portee was there to see it all. Now, Portee was facing serious charges himself at the time. 2 first-degree robbery convictions that could have landed him a 50-year bid. But he cut a deal, testified against Taylor, and in return, only served 21 months. That was his first taste of how the system worked, and he played it to his favor. After that, he made his way out west to LA, getting tight with the Bloods out there. That's where the blueprint started forming. Then, at 21, he got locked up again, this time for attempted murder, and landed back at Rikers. But he came back with a whole new mentality, and that's when everything changed. Inside those walls, he linked up with Leonard OG Dead-Eye McKenzie, and together, they sparked something major, the United Blood Nation, or UBN. What started as a prison crew at Rikers quickly turned into one of the most violent and influential gangs on the East Coast. And it didn't stay locked behind bars. UBN started spreading fast from New York all the way to LA. Even while Portee was still doing time, his name rang out. To a lot of young bloods hitting the streets, he was like a legend. The guy who built it all behind prison walls, supposedly standing up against oppression. To some, he wasn't just a gang leader, he was a street revolutionary. By the time he got released in June 1999, he was a legend, and he didn't waste time trying to fade into the background. Within months, he turned the Bronx into his playground, setting up a street empire where the Bloods ran everything: drugs, women, stick-ups, whatever brought money and power. He created 14 different sets with names like 1-8 Trey, named after 183rd Street, Sex Money Murder, and Gangster Killer Bloods. Each set had its own hand signs, codes, and way of moving. The philosophy behind it all was deep too. It wasn't just about crime, it was about black power, street loyalty, and punishing disloyalty. But even with that twisted sense of purpose, the violence and chaos they left behind hit hardest in the very communities they claimed to represent. Crime skyrocketed, and it wasn't just about fighting rival gangs anymore. Every street in the hood became a chessboard for these sets. Porte was running an operation that brought in real money, drug trafficking, robberies, fraud, you name it. He wasn't just making noise, he was building an empire. And for a while, it looked like nothing could touch him. But in 2002, that empire came crashing down. The feds hit him with 10 heavy charges: racketeering, murder conspiracy, credit card fraud, and drug trafficking. It wasn't some small-time bust either. The government had been watching him, collecting evidence, and they were ready to take him down. When he stood in court, he tried to flip the script. He told the judge he started the Bloods in jail to fight oppression, not to terrorize neighborhoods. He said the image the government painted of him was blown way out of proportion. He admitted he wasn't a saint, but also questioned where all the bodies and guns were if he was truly the mastermind they claimed. But the feds weren't buying it. Prosecutor Daniel Geithner called him a gangster who had taken over a whole community. He pushed hard for a life sentence, saying Porte's influence was so dangerous, it didn't matter how old he got, he'd always be a threat. Judge Naomi Rice Buchwald listened to both sides, but in the end, she wasn't moved by Porte's speech. On April 14, 2003, she hit him with a 50-year sentence. That was the end of his reign in the streets, and he was sent to ADX Florence. In 2021, he got a short break, moved to Florence High under a step-down program. But by 2022, he was right back in ADX, locked down like before. Pedro Gutierrez. Pedro Gutierrez didn't waste any time getting into that street life. By 17, he was already knee-deep repping with the Trigger Finger Posse crew and caught his first major case for armed robbery. But that was just the start. Over the next few years, he got picked up 5 more times. One of those arrests tied to a wild shooting where 4 people got hit and 1 didn't make it. That one landed him a second-degree murder conviction in 1996, and he was sentenced to 26 years to life. While waiting for his assault trial at Rikers Island, Gutierrez turned that joint into his war zone. He was caught with weapons 7 different times and slashed or stabbed 4 other inmates. He ended up doing over 1,000 days in the jail segregation unit, basically solitary for all the chaos he caused. Somewhere along the way, Gutierrez linked up with the United Blood Nation, UBN for short. That crew was born right inside Rikers back in the 90s, started by black inmates trying to stand their ground against the dominant Latino gangs. As time went on, UBN broke off into different sets, and one of the wildest of them all was the 9 trade gangsters, aka the Billies. That's the set Gutierrez ran with. UBN had a whole rank system, starting at the bottom with Scrap and going up through the Star Generals, then to Low, High, and finally the top dog, Godfather. Gutierrez, who went by names like Magoo, Inferno, and Light, didn't just climb that ladder, he ran the whole building. Since 2003, he had been serving as the godfather and chairman of UBN's National Council, basically calling shots for the whole operation while locked up in the New York State prison system. Even behind bars, Gutierrez was still pulling strings. He was involved in collecting gang dues and issuing orders to members in the streets and other prisons. One of the most violent moves he made came in 2011 when he reportedly ordered a full-blown gang war in North Carolina. That war was aimed at a rival group called Pretty Tony. The fallout was heavy. Several inmates got seriously hurt, and 5 different prisons across the state were locked down for 6 straight months. That's how serious his reach was. By 2017, Gutierrez's name popped up again, this time in a massive federal indictment that came down in Charlotte. He was one of 83 suspected UBN members named, and the charges ran deep. Prosecutors stripped away any mystery, straight up labeling Gutierrez as the top leader of UBN, controlling operations across multiple states, all while serving time for murder. Even locked up in a Mack security prison upstate, he was still running things. Dude was holding meetings with gang affiliates like nothing changed. The feds even caught him meeting face-to-face with members who traveled all the way from North Carolina just to get the latest orders from the Godfather himself. While all that was going down, money was flowing heavy. Prison accounts for Gutierrez and two other top UBN leaders, James Buxton and Omari Uno B. Rosero, were getting stacked. Those weren't just some symbolic dues. That was real street money, collected and funneled inside to keep the machine moving and keep the bosses paid. Eventually, the feds said enough's enough and tried to snatch it all from their accounts. When it was finally time to face the music in court, Gutierrez got hit with a RICO charge, conspiracy to participate in racketeering. That's the same charge they used to take down mafia bosses, and it speaks to the level of power and violence Gutierrez was operating with. In the end, he got 20 years tacked on top of his already existing sentence. During sentencing, U.S. District Judge Frank Whitney didn't sugarcoat a thing. He told the courtroom that what Gutierrez had managed to do from behind prison walls was terrifying. He said just locking Gutierrez up wasn't enough. They had to make sure he could never run anything again. The judge even admitted he wished he could give him life, but the law capped the sentence for that particular charge at 20 years. So instead, he made a special recommendation that Gutierrez be sent to ADX Florence, the federal Supermax prison out in Colorado, where they stashed the most dangerous, most connected inmates in the system. Appreciate you watching. If you liked it, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more.